right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Where Islamabad, alhamdulillah, is gearing up for the Islamabad Talks 2.0, where Islamabad has actually emerged as the diplomatic capital of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, to speak more about it as to how the United States of America and Iran are going to get onto the table and speak about whatever their red lines are and how they will be agreed upon. To get a very geostrategic perspective, ladies and gentlemen, we're very lucky that we have been joined by a geostrategic expert, happens to be Dr. Auqaab Alizai. Dr. Auqaab, assalamu alaikum, good morning. How are you feeling today?
Thank you. Very good, very good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I like the filter. I like the filter in your background. But let's get started with the conversation. Dr. Auqaab, I think I'm going to get started with you over here. You know, since we are speaking about it, I think I would want to kind of first of all establish where do we stand. You know, let's do a bit of reality mapping. You know, from a strategic standpoint, how would you characterize the current phase of these negotiations?
I think the most accurate way to describe where we are right now is that we are at a very sensitive but diplomatic moment where tensions and engagement are both present at the same time. On one hand, there are clearly pressures in the system. You can see incidents in the background. You see signaling both sides, different ones from Iran, different ones from the US, and actions that may increase uncertainty. But, you know, a lot of it is also blown up by the media. So there's a lot of confusion in this in the short term. For example, last night, the US was boarding Iranian cargo ship. But you know, these are small incidents to ensure a stronger position on the negotiating table, and that's more important than anything else. But you know, what is equally important is dialogue is not broken. It is actually occurring, and it's continuing in some areas, even expanding. And that tells us that despite tensions, that there's a shared understanding that engagement is necessary. And I think both of them are recognizing that they have to come to the table. And even there's been a draft proposal, many number of them, and actually a compromise to some extent from the US, from what they were holding back before, to from the 20 years down to the 15 years of pause through enrichment. Um, and that means there's a give. And that shows the momentum is positive. Uranium being diluted, not exported, IAEA oversight, and the Hormuz Strait reopened. For example, that's many of the things that are on here. And we're also seeing a kind of diplomatic surge in parallel. For example, Pakistan is moving out and pushing for some stabilization and pulling the parties together at different levels in an effort to keep the communication lines open across multiple tracks rather than allowing the situation to narrow and then go into confrontation. I think Pakistan has been very positive in this, and it's been very well recognized around the world. And even in moments where tensions, the fact that diplomacy is continuing means that there is space for outcomes, and that both parties are actually wanting this rather than escalation. They do not want escalation. I think they're recognizing that the only way they have a future in this is through negotiations. And in this respect, Pakistan, in this environment, is particularly focused on supporting that direction. And because the stability in the space is not just a regional concern, it directly affects economic planning, energy security, and broader regional connectivity. And there's a clear interest in ensuring that momentum towards um, engagement is not lost. And I think that's the real key point that we need to make. That engagement is on board right now, and all
Exactly,
parties are
Dr. Auqaab,
really involved.
exactly. I get your point, and you know, obviously you've actually emphasized on, you know, what signals suggest movement versus statement at this stage.
We do know for a fact that both parties are coming back to Islamabad to continue these talks. So what is particularly driving both of the parties to stay engaged within these talks?
So, yes, that's perfect. I mean, I think we need to get back to what the point at hand is, and we all know that there's not an approved war from the US side at all. The American public doesn't. But what's bringing them back? I mean, I think the simplest way to understand this is that both sides believe that talking is much safer than not talking. I think because once you step away from the table, things don't just pause, they tend to drift away and then sometimes goes in the wrong direction. That could lead to escalation. So I think both sides really want the conversation to keep going and they want to have a steady situation. And even if they're not really agreeing yet, now, if you look at it from a more strategic angle, what we are seeing is a form of controlled engagement under uncertainty. I think neither side fully trusts the other side and is ready to concede on their core issues. But there is some give already. We've noticed that there is some give already. So both sides recognize that staying engaged allows them to manage the risk rather than to react to it. And I think after what the Donald Trump said previously a few weeks ago when he said he's going to finish a whole civilization, that had a massive impact in the American public and around the world. So I think he's taken that on board as well, that you can't just have too much bluster. And it's important because the environment around these talks is already sensitive and markets are reacting consistently with what he says in the international environment. So regional actors respond as well, and there are small shifts that can have a wider consequence. So dialogue becomes really the only way of keeping things manageable and things that both sides actually want. And at the same time, the pace tells you something. This is not rushed. It's a deliberate interaction in negotiations like this. You don't start with the hardest issues. What I feel is going to happen is that you start feeling the space outside. You see where the movement is possible and where it isn't. And, if you can see it in strategic terms, kind of sequencing approach. You build from the edges, from the outside, and you work inwards rather than going straight to the core issues where the disagreements would erupt and then there'll be nothing happening. That reduces risk is to work on the edges and see where you can build up positive alignments. And even though they may not seem to be large, they're quite small individually, but taken together can become quite substantial. And there is possibility to give and take here and movement forward. So if we bring it back to a more human level, there is more recognition that neither side benefits from things getting out of control and getting worse. They may disagree strongly in public limelight, but escalation increases pressures that are harder to control for everybody. And even the chief of staff, Moltke, during the 1880s, the German chief of staff in the 1880s under Bismarck said, once you have plans, once the war starts, they all go out of the window. So they all recognize that you have to carefully calibrate things in real
Exactly,
time.
Dr. Auqaab. Exactly, Dr. Auqaab. And thank you so much for pinpointing that as well as to how, they've strategized it and how there might be multiple other layers of these conversation and these talks as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Auqaab, for joining us. It was wonderful to be in conversation with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, look after yourselves. Good morning. Allah Hafiz.